imprisoned for 10,000 years. Banished from my own homeland. And now you dare enter my realm. You are not prepared.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another guide to hardcore. Today, we're going over the hardcore challenge in TBC. As you know, TBC brought about changes in almost every aspect of the game, and today, I'll be going over each patch, talking about what those changes mean to the challenge, as well as talking about a few other things that help you along in your journey. This won't be so much of a guide as it is a collection of information, and as such, I won't be talking about how to do this or how to do that. I'll be keeping things brief, or at least trying to, as there's a lot to cover. Instead, my goal for this video is to answer a simple question. Will the hardcore challenge be easier in TBC Classic? So let's jump in. I'll be covering both the pre-patch and official launch as one patch here for simplicity. There's a decent amount to talk about, but let's quickly run through it all, starting with the biggest change: class changes and balance. The overall to each class puts a lot on the table for hardcore players. Each talent tree is now extremely viable, and no one spec is particularly better than the other two. Each offers a different playstyle to fit your needs, without feeling like it's useless. Mix this with all the changes to class abilities and player skills, it's easy to get excited to play a new class, or even re-level one you've already done before in hardcore. I'm not going to cover all the changes as there's just too much to talk about. I'll leave that for others to cover. Or if you'd like me to cover that info, let me know in the comments below. But here are a few examples of what I'm talking about. Consecration is available to all paladins. Hunter traps are usable in combat, and they remove the dead zone. Druids can outpounce without needing to be behind their target. Weapon skill will no longer reduce the percentage damage loss due to glancing. The players will gain 0.1% to their critical strike rating per weapon skill against monsters above their level. All pets will now receive a percentage of their master's armor, spell damage, spell resistances, attack power, and stamina. Hots, dots, and channeled abilities have been rebalanced to receive a higher percentage of plus spell damage and plus healing. The other major change is the introduction of Blood Elves and Draenei as playable races. Other than letting each faction have access to both paladins and shamans, these two new races don't really offer anything that allow them any advantage in the hardcore challenge. So there's no real reason to choose them over any other race, save going Blood Elf for Pally or Space Goat for Shaman. But they do bring something to the challenge that significantly changes things up. 4 new quest areas for levels 1 to 20. My early prediction is that you'll see almost every person attempting the challenge later on in TBC Classic running through Eversong and Ghostlands, or Azure Mist and Blood Mist Isle, regardless of what race they chose. And the reasoning is simple. It's faster. There's better gear rewards, more quests within a smaller area, and the questing path is a bit more streamlined for the 1 to 20 grind. Horde players do have a slight advantage in the form of both ease of getting to Silvermoon and the Tranquil and faction rewards, which has some nice gear upgrades available decently early on. Alliance players who start Night Elf can just take 2 ships to get to Azure Mist, but Human, Dwarf, and Gnomes will still have to make their way to Menethil via the Mountain Pass in order to get over to Aberdeen and then take the boat to Azure Mist. I'll have a link for a video below showing how to get to Menethil safely. Next on the list is changes to professions. There's only a few to mention in this patch, but they have a significant effect on the challenge. The first being the introduction of JEWELCRAFTIng. JEWELCRAFTIng brings yet another extremely viable profession to the hardcore challenge, with the ability to make 3 of the most annoying gear pieces to get: rings, necklaces, and trinkets, and if you make it to Outland, gems for those precious gear sockets. In addition, it offers some great healing items in the form of stone statues. These are instant cast items that place a statue on the ground and heal you for a set amount each second via a tether. You also have quite the range in which they continue to heal, so you can drop it as you run away and still receive most of the healing it provides. The other major change to professions is that all profession-made items that have been created up to now have been given proper stats based on the current expansion item level progression table. This makes blacksmithing, leatherworking, and tailoring that much better for your run, as now the items that you make will have better stats that aren't all over the place. There's also a small change that's both a profession and class change, but I feel is necessary to know. Rogues who craft and use Thistle Tea will now see a reduced energy gain when used above level 40. Bit of a nerf, but it's still useful. As a last note on professions, this next piece of info isn't relevant to the hardcore challenge. However, no one else has mentioned it in any video I've seen, and seeing as we'll all still be playing the game normally as well as hardcore, I felt this info needed to be out there. Enchanting saw a major change when it comes to disenchanting. Now you'll need a certain skill level in enchanting in order to disenchant items. This means you'll no longer be able to send random BOE greens to your level 5 bank vault to disenchant. Here's a quick rundown on the skill required versus the item's level to disenchant it. Lastly, Meaning Stones now function similar to a Warlock spell. Players can select a party member to be summoned and right-click on the stone. Only a second party member is needed then to click on the portal. This is useful for your hardcore dungeon runs if you don't already have a Warlock in the group. While patch 2.1 added almost as much to the game as the first patch did, a lot of it isn't relevant to the hardcore challenge. But there are a few big things to mention. Even more class changes were introduced with the release of 2.1, so let's quickly go over the ones you might want to know about. Druid's Barkskin is now a flat damage reduction and no longer reduces attack speed. This is now a great defensive tool usable in all forms. Hey guys, Nick here in post-production. Sorry, but I made a mistake. Druid's Barkskin is not castable in all forms, only in caster form. That change wasn't implemented till Wrath. Sorry about that, let me fix this real quick. And there we go, good as new. Meanwhile, the Hunter's Mend pet was changed from a channeled ability to an instant cast hot, and pets can now be taught avoidance, which reduces their AoE damage taken. The biggest change, however, goes to rogues. Sap no longer removes you from stealth when used, which is huge for those tricky pulls. And you now have a better chance at finding blinding powder from pickpocketed lockboxes. This means rogues can now take herbalism up to 70, gather a couple stacks of Swift Thistle for teas, and then drop herbalism for something else, without feeling like they need to take herbalism in order to reliably make blinding powders. On the profession side of things, alchemy gets a huge nerf when it comes to hardcore. Elixirs now stack in one of two categories, battle and guardian elixirs. And you can only have one of each type of elixir up at a time. This means you can no longer run around with Elixir of Agility, Giant Growth, Defense, Fortitude, and a strong Troll's Blood potion anymore. This will have a significant effect on the viability of the profession for your run. However, potions such as Fire, Nature, or Frost Protection aren't affected by this change. Additionally, elixirs now stack with class abilities such as Arcane Intellect or Priest Fortitude buff. Lastly for 2.1, here are a few miscellaneous things. The chance to break crowd control from damage has been changed. The increased chance for a spell to break from taking a critical strike has been removed. For mobs below 60, the golden rule is lower damage abilities have less chance to break a CC. For all targets over 60, they have a slightly larger chance to break out of CC effects when they take damage now. Additionally, a couple new flight points and paths have been added, listed here. Touted by many to be the worst patch of TBC, as the main feature added was in-game voice chat, 2.2 offers few changes in the view of a hardcore player. But some of these are significant, so let's start with the change that killed the mage. Area damage caps were introduced in this patch, effectively telling mages that they were too strong at AoE. And while most hardcore mages don't AoE grind, there are a few that still will from time to time. This change affects spells like Blizzard, Arcane Explosion, Volley, Hurricane, Rain of Fire, and Frost Nova. Here's a quick summary on how the mechanic will work from now on. Each rank of a spell has a damage cap per tick. Once this cap has been reached, the spell does less damage to compensate so that it will not exceed its own cap. The caps are not affected by gear or talents, so if you have good gear, you will reach the cap on fewer mobs. For example, if Blizzard hits a single mob for 100 damage per tick and has a cap of 1000 per tick, then you could hit 10 mobs before the damage gets lowered. If you hit 11 mobs, then its damage is 1000 divided by 11, which is 90.9, rounded up to 91 per tick. If you add another mob to hit 12 total, then its damage is 83 per tick. You can see that this is why mages are no longer the AoE kings in TBC, for hardcore or normal play. Flame Strike and Consecration act as charred earth effects and aren't affected by this change. The other big change to 2.2 was the introduction of Brewfest and the Headless Horseman events. Brewfest doesn't have much impact for hardcore, but offers some nice food buffs and some vanity items. The Headless Horseman event, however, does affect you. Shade of the Horseman will attack Keranos, Goldshire, Azure Watch, Razor Hill, Brill, and Falconwing Square. These attacks consist primarily of Shade of the Horsemen circling around overhead on a flying horse, throwing flaming pumpkins at the various buildings, and sometimes at the players. These flames can damage and can even kill you, so you'll want to be careful around these starting towns if Hallow's End is underway. If all the fires are put out, the Shade of the Horsemen will drop down to the ground and start attacking players. Thankfully, the event can only be started by a level 7 character, and there's a great way to tell if the event has been started, so that way you can stay clear.
Prepare yourselves! The bells have tolled! Shelter your weak, your young, and your old!
Lastly, for 2.2, here are a few miscellaneous things. The following old world factions have had their acquisition rate significantly increased: Cenarian Circle, Argent Dawn, and Timbermaw Hold. This is huge for those who want to travel to Winterspring, as it's now easier to hit unfriendly reputation with Timbermaw. The other two aren't as important here. Yowler, who drops Yowler's Paw needed for the Alliance quest Howling in the Hills over in Redridge, has had his level reduced down to 20 from 25. The Druids of the Talon in Wailing Caverns, as well as several creatures in Blackfathom Depths and Sunken Temple, will no longer permanently flee. This doesn't seem like a big change, but if these mobs ran away and did actually get away from the group, they wouldn't stop running, and could potentially aggro the entire dungeon. Meeting Stones can no longer be used to summon players that do not meet the level requirements. This is a precursor to a huge change in low-level dungeons, though its effects won't be apparent until we get into the 2.3 changes in a bit. Needless to say, hardcore dungeon runs are about to be changed slightly.
You wanna stay? You stay here forever! We gonna bury you here.
I know I said I'll be keeping things brief in this beginning, but honestly, I could do an hour-long video talking about the changes relevant to hardcore from just this one patch alone. Honestly, this whole video was inspired due to this patch. So let's start with the class changes that are good to know. The Paladin's Retribution talent tree saw an overhaul here, making them a lot stronger. If you're playing a Rat Pally, this is a good day for you. Feral Druid's Heart of the Wild talent now increases your attack power by 2% instead of increasing strength by 4% per rank while in cat form. This is a huge power boost. Additionally, if you are in a shapeshift form and you try to use an ability that it may only be used in caster form, you will leave the form and use that ability. This means you can now shift from one form to another in one action without the need for macros. Mage's Evocation got a huge buff as well. It now regens 15% mana per tick instead of increased spirit regen. Priests see a couple major changes here as well. Fear Ward is now available to all priests. Dwarfs and Rainites get chastised as their new class racial, and the Night Elf ability Star Charge is no longer channeled, costs 0 mana, is now a magic effect, lasts 15 seconds, causes damage every 3 seconds, and has a 30-second cooldown. It's free damage. Additionally, if you are in Shadow form and you try to use an ability that may not be used in Shadow form, you will leave Shadow form and use that ability. Rogue's Poisons now lasts an hour, and Blind has been changed a bit. It's no longer a poison, it's now a physical attack, which is great. A lot of mobs are resistant to nature or have poison immunity. The reagent cost has also been removed. I did say I'd be covering this patch by patch, hence why I left in the info about gathering blinding powder via junk boxes earlier, but it's now no longer needed for blind. Additionally, if you are in stealth and you try to use an ability that may not be used while you're stealth, you will leave stealth and use that ability. Two-handed axes and two-handed maces are now trainable by all shamans at the appropriate weapon masters. The talent is replaced with shamanistic focus. After landing a melee critical strike, you reduce the mana cost of your next shock by 60%. Hunter and Warlock pets will now try to get behind the target if they don't have aggro. Lastly, Warrior's Whirlwind will now hit targets with both of your weapons instead of just your main hand if you're dual wielding. Outside of class specifics, items and talents that increase weapon skills now increase weapon expertise, a new stat that reduces the chance targets will dodge or parry you. Also, almost all items and enchantments that provide bonus healing will now provide smaller number of bonus spell power. Additionally, many racials have been changed. Weapon specializations for Dwarf, Human, Orc, and Troll have been changed to grant 1% crit instead of increased weapon skill, and Gnome's Escape Artist has had its cooldown increased. Only one major change for professions in this patch, but it's a nice one. All primary profession trainers outside of capitals, so alchemy, blacksmithing, enchanting, engineering, leatherworking, and tailoring, have been changed to train from 1 to 300 skill now. Additionally, the capital cities now possess artisan level trainers for the primary professions they support, so you no longer have to travel out to the world to find them. Some smaller changes include a journal that can be found inside fishing crates that allow you to track fishing nodes on your minimap. You're allowed to fish in Ironforge again, and wizard and mana oils crafted by enchanters have had their duration increased. While enchanting still isn't viable outside of a duo run, making a couple of stacks of low-level oils will last you longer now with their increased duration. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this patch, the old world leveling revamp. Instead of me telling you all about the changes, I'll read you a quick summary from an interview with Daenerys and go over a breakdown after. Though we've given you a few examples of things to come, we think everyone will be pleasantly surprised when they see the full extent of the changes. As many of you already know, we've been working on changes designed to improve various aspects of leveling for those making their way to 60. These improvements, available in patch 2.3, will come in many forms and should significantly contribute to a more fluid and enjoyable leveling experience. The first notable change was to simply reduce the amount of experience needed each level by approximately 15% between levels 20 and 60. Questing plays a very large role in World of Warcraft, especially while leveling, and we felt that improvements to this front were necessary as well. Experience gained for completing a quest between levels 30 and 60 is being increased. This increase becomes more substantial as you make your way towards 60. Additionally, many outdoor elite mobs will become non-elites, making many quests which were previously too difficult or required a group much easier, and offer the same rewards, and in some cases better. A good example of this change would be Stromgarde Keep in Arathi Highlands, which will become a solo-friendly environment when patch 2.3 goes live. We've also added approximately 60 new quests in Dustwallow Marsh. This should help players who find themselves lacking quests in the 30 to 40 range. The Steamwheel Cartel is building a new town of Mudsprocken in the southwest, so you'll have to wait until construction is complete to learn more about these changes. We're making other improvements to pre-BC dungeons that players will likely find most agreeable. The level range for almost every dungeon is being adjusted so that there is much smaller range between the level of mobs found early in the dungeon to those found towards the end. For example, Shadowfang Keep is currently designed for levels 18 to 25, which means that right now, a group of players who are towards the bottom of that range will find it nearly impossible to complete the dungeon, while groups towards the top of the range will find most of the dungeon trivial. Using our new model, similar to what you'll notice with Burning Crusade dungeons, Shadowfang Keep is being retuned for levels 18 to 21. We also want to make running a dungeon more worthwhile. In addition to increasing quest experience for dungeon quests, we're also upgrading all pre-BC dungeon boss drops to blue quality items. There's a lot to unpack here when you look at the grand scale of how this will affect the hardcore challenge. Most of it is self-explanatory, but here's a breakdown of the new dungeon changes, as this needs more context. Here's a list showing the new level range of the mobs you'll find in each dungeon. As you can see, each dungeon got squished significantly, with the exception of BRD getting a smaller squish. Uldaman saw the biggest change, with the last boss, Arcadus, being 40 now instead of 46. So far, everything I've covered has been a great change for hardcore players, but here's where we run into a weird issue. One change to Old World dungeons that wasn't talked about in the post from Daenerys is that meeting stone level requirements, the LFG system, and dungeon quests have been adjusted to match the new dungeon level ranges shown. Something else they did this patch was remove the level range displayed on the stones. So now we're in a weird spot where levels of the dungeons are based on the mobs inside, not the stones, but you won't know the levels unless you run it, or have a list like this one posted somewhere or memorized. Currently, the rules as written for hardcore dungeon run is your character level must be within the meeting stone requirements of the dungeon. You are allowed to exceed the maximum level of the dungeon if you level up inside of said dungeon. But if the stones don't display the level of the ranges, then you see where I'm going with this. It's an easy fix honestly, but something that the hardcore community mods will have to talk about and possibly revise when it comes to rulings. Of course, it's possible that TBC Classic will keep the level ranges on the stone, at which point nothing needs to be done. I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens with launch and how the rules get changed. The dungeon loot revamp is also a pretty big change. Essentially, all specific loot drops from bosses will be blue quality, and the current blue drops will actually be better. Most surprising though is that if a boss has a specific white item drop, that's also blue now, which is crazy when you think about it. Raxor's Hammer from Deadmines is a level 15 white two-handed mace with 11.9 DPS, but is now a level 15 blue two-handed mace with 17.7 DPS and 11 stamina. I don't think there's much else I need to explain at this point talking about the leveling revamp. It's pretty obvious that the journey from 20 to 60 will be much faster than Classic. Another big change to this patch is the introduction of guild banks, which doesn't seem like it has anything to do with hardcore, but it does. Currently, most people playing are in one of the hardcore guilds, and when this goes live, everybody will have access to it. It's meant as an easy way for guilds to stock up, or to trade items between each other. Obviously, I'm sure the mods will address this and just tell people not to use it, and change permissions to the guild bank via the guild rank system, but I have a different idea. A while ago, somebody was asking in a cargo stream about sending their gold from a character that died to a non-hardcore character on the same server. Why waste the money gained, right? Cargos had mentioned that it wasn't a bad idea, but at the same time, it's kind of a gray area for an official ruling, as the character had failed the challenge and had to be deleted anyways. So here's my idea. The guildmaster can set up the ranks to allow people to deposit money and items without being able to withdraw anything. If a character dies, they can choose to drop all the money they have into the guild bank. As money builds, it can be used for future in-game events as a prize pool, say 50 gold to the winner of a level 20 dueling tournament, or 100 gold to the first 3 people who complete a scavenger hunt, where you have to travel the world fighting mobs for rare white drops. Just some ideas to throw out. I know there's no trading allowed technically, but I feel like an in-game event run by mods warrants an exception without the need to always do real money prizes. Lastly, here are some miscellaneous things added to this patch. A new flight point has been added to the Rebel Camp and STV for Alliance. The Curs and Medicine Men in STV have an increased cooldown on their heals now. Defies Pillager's Fireball does less damage. Thank the Lord. All agility and strength on non-crafted low-level cloth items has been replaced with other stats, usually bonus spell power, but sometimes other stats beneficial to mana users. All vendors with an associate faction now give discounts at all levels above neutral. 5% for friendly, 10% for honored, 15% for revered, and 20% for exalted. As much as 2.3 was a mouthful of info, 2.4 only has one change that I feel is useful knowledge for hardcore players, and 2 additional changes introduced in 2.4.3. So the first change in 2.4 is the addition of 2 new cooking recipes, charred bear kebabs and juicy bear burgers, both of which can be purchased from either Bale for Horde players or Meligan for Alliance, both located in Felwood. These recipes require 250 skill to learn, and are created from meat found on level 48 to 56 bears. This will aid players in leveling up their cooking skill to 300 without the need for fishing. Then in 2.4.3, we see a change in how certain stats affect lower level characters. Low level players will now convert parry rating, defense rating, and block rating into their corresponding defensive stats at the same rate as a level 34 player. This prevents low level characters from overly benefiting, as these stats give massive bonuses the lower level you are. Finally, we come to the last change in all of TBC that has an impact on hardcore, and honestly, if this was the only change, I'd be happy with it. Mounts at 30. That's right, I'll say it again. Mounts at 30. Let the impact of that sink in a little. Thought about it? Great, because here's some more good news. While the cost of the actual mount stays the same at 10 and 100 gold for epic, the riding cost is now only 35 gold for your first mount, and only 600 gold for the epic. And that's before you factor in reputation discounts. It's not that hard to get honored with your starting race by 30, so you'll basically only need 41 gold and 50 silver to obtain your first mount. And that's not that hard to get either. Well, that's mostly everything. I think we have enough info here to answer the question now. Will the hardcore challenge be easier in TBC Classic? The long answer is yes, it will be, for all the reasons I've just described. This was a lot to cover and talk about, and it's really only about a quarter of the changes in TBC, the rest being irrelevant to the hardcore challenge. Any way you look at it, the journey to the finish line should be smooth sailing as long as you're careful. But at the same time, the short answer is no. The hardcore challenge is called that for a simple reason. It is challenging. The hardest part of this whole thing is the fact that you only have one life, and regardless of all these changes making things easier or more convenient, one wrong pull, one CC being resisted, one time being dazed is all it takes to end your run. As you may have noticed, I didn't really talk about Outland itself, or talk about anything for the journey from 60 to 70. That's honestly for another video, because that subject opens a whole new can of worms. So what do you guys think? Do you think the challenge will be easier? Think I missed anything? Let me know down in the comments below. As a last note, thank you to all the people who subscribe to my channel. I don't get the chance to work on videos a lot, and I like to try to stay unique. I don't like the idea of putting out a video that 50 other people have covered, hence why it's taken so long for a third video from me. I'll be working on another video soon, so stay tuned for that. I hope you continue to have blessed runs well into TBC Classic, and I'll see you soon. TM.